Thank you very much, Mrs. Delvaux, and thank you also very much to the organizers for the invitation to say a few words here today. I'll try to keep my remarks rather brief, because unfortunately I have to leave at 4 o'clock, and I hope that there could also be some time for some intervention. First, in order to save time, I could say I can subscribe to everything Paul Magnette just said, and also he was lining out a lot of the things going on in EU, and I think that also Paul Magnette personally has done a lot of very hard work during the Belgian presidency, and I hope that you can really also get the results that you are planning to in the remaining 6 weeks, Paul. Some would say climate change wasn't that last year's trend. Can we talk about something else this year? I know that it's not somebody in this room, because then you would not be here. But that is, of course, also what some of our citizens would think. And I think that it is very encouraging to read this very good report, because it actually does not sort of discuss whether we should do things, whether we should be ambitious, but it very specifically tries to address this, okay, let's get things done exactly. How are we going to do this? What do we have to change? And I would try to focus in my short address here a bit on that. Trying to say that, yes, there is a lot of things politicians should do. Paul Magnette was just mentioning a lot of things, and also referring to the low-carbon strategy for 2050 that the Commission will present in the spring, together with an energy roadmap for 2050, together with a white paper on transport, not as standalone initiatives, but where internally in the Commission they have been thought together in a more holistic, coherent manner. That kind of targets, frameworks, incentives, standard setting, things like that, and things that stem from setting that kind of targets politically, of course, is very, very important. That's also why some of us are still struggling with the international negotiations. I'll not bore you with this today, but it's just that's of course also part of this picture that we try to take care that globally we can sort of raise the common denominator on all these issues. So politicians evidently have a very important role to play. Just one thing on that in EU on standards, because I think we have a tremendous tool in standards, also in introducing new technologies, and now this report was also on new technologies. We could do a lot by standards. We could do a lot, of course, by public procurement, things like that. But my experience as minister and my short experience as commissioner is we should very much take care in Europe that every time we set standards, we are not diluting it too much. We are very democratic. We have all these dialogues, all these processes. And before we get to the very end, then often we end up setting weaker standards than we ought to. We should take very much care that the standards we make are actually driving, pushing the market forward. And if not, we will do it by our own free will. Then I think that very soon it will dawn on us that they are doing things very differently in other parts of the world, and they are challenging us. But just briefly to say, yes, there is a lot the politicians should do. Yes, there is a lot that the business community should do in the way that they should provide the solutions, make the RD&D, of course, often together with public money, somehow targeted projects, enhancing demonstration projects. That's also an area where we could do more together. Paul Magnette was mentioning this cost of non-cooperation. We could do much more if we do it together sometimes, and was better at that in Europe. But business communities must show that the solutions are there, develop the solutions, make the innovation, and then also show to citizens that it pays off, and also to the politicians that it pays off at the bottom line. It's not just something you do to feel good, it's actually because you can earn money. And I think that we need business communities to help us spread the best cases much faster than is the case today. But then the rest of my minutes here, I will try to focus on the citizens, because I think that what we've tried to do over recent years is also slightly to change the narrative. Not because climate change is not still very important, and this scientific case, and the 2 degrees, and the 450 ppms, and the polar bears, and the glaciers, and all this. But because we actually managed to mobilize people now. They actually understood, there's something here which is important. But So those of you who are journalists, also you will know that even though you know that a thing is very essential, then there is a limit as to how long it can stay on the agenda as something new. Even though you know it's important, you would say, but maybe you could just tell us something different, something new, just at least as long as it was new. Maybe it would not have to be that essential then. But that is why I think that it is rather important, and that's what we have tried to do also in the new Commission, to say that climate change is not just about climate change. Not meaning that climate change is not important in itself, not degrading the sense of urgency, it must still be there because that is for real. But to try to say to people, you know, when my kids are my age, we will not be 6.7 billion on planet Earth, we will be 9 billion people all wanting a share in the good life. You can believe in climate change or not. You can believe in what Mr. Schellenhuber and others are telling you or not. But in any case, you must admit, we have to develop a more sustainable, green kind of growth, a more energy and resource efficient growth. And that's actually what the Commission did, saying that we must try to say climate change is about climate, it's about energy, energy security, it's about resources, and it's about innovation, growth, jobs. And if we can sort of make the narrative that it's about all these three things at a time, then it's not something that we cannot deal with as long as we have an economic crisis, then it's something we have to deal with to exit that crisis that personally I believe we are not exiting anytime soon, because one thing is the economic crisis, the immediate financial crisis, but it's a much more difficult situation that the European countries as such are faced with, being challenged competitive-wise from a lot of new areas. And I think that is important to get that message across to citizens. But I also think that it's rather important that this narrative is something that make it relevant to people. What do we expect them to do? That makes it tangible. I mean, you can tell people that the glaciers are melting and people would say, yes, and what do you want me to do about that? I mean, it's a bit too much for the individual. So I think to make it relevant and also to make it fun, that also has to be part of the narrative. I think that we must sort of include this climate challenge and the energy and resource challenge into the general narrative about where do we want to head in Europe for years to come. What are we going to live from? How are we going to manage in this new competitive picture and the new geostrategic picture? But I also think that we must make it an attractive vision for each individual. That it's not about if you are in for climate change, then you're also in for a very gray future, a future where you cannot do this and you must not do this, and a lot of, things that it's very difficult to make people find very attractive. No, it's about cleaner environment. It's about cleaner air for your children. It's about using energy in a more intelligent way. I mean, basically the message is the same, but you can frame it in many different ways. Now, Paul was mentioning the smart meters, things like that. That's a very, very good opportunity, actually, to make it visible to people, also that you have a choice and you have a responsibility as a citizen, and it actually makes a difference what you do. Just to give you one specific example of this, some few years back, I think we started it in 2006 in Denmark, we had a campaign called 1 ton less. We have this average consumption of 10 ton per capita in Denmark, emitting 10 tons CO2. And what can people do about that? Well, if you break it down and say, okay, listen, if you just started to reduce 1 ton less, here are the tools. Tell us how big is your house, what source of energy do you have, what kind of transportation do you use, things like that. And it turned out that more than 50% of all grown-up Danes had heard about this campaign after 1 or 2 years, and 90 some of them said it had changed their habits. But it has basically also changed their understanding of what climate change is all about, because suddenly it became very, very tangible, very action-oriented. I think that is a very important point.